Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. Today, we are going to be joined by Assembly member Lori Wilson, who comes from Suisun City, where she covers Solano County, as well as parts of Contra Costa County. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your district, Dad, and go from there?
I get to represent all of Solano, all of the beautiful golden hills, sometimes green, but a lot of times golden, of Solano, and East Contra Costa County, which is really cool. I have the city of Oakley, and I have a ton of towns like Discovery Bay, Byron, Knights, and all of that. And then a little bit of Sacramento County. I like to joke, if your backyard or front yard is the Delta, you're probably in my district. And so just a little bit, less than 1,000 residents in Sacramento County. So I have a great district, very beautiful, and some wonderful people. I think we have, because Solano County is one of the most diverse counties in the entire state, I have a very diverse district from just all walks of life. You name it, we have it.
What kind of unique challenges does that diversity cover?
Oh my goodness, a lot. I think that part of it is the diversity is the ideological spectrum that you have in party politics from both sides of the aisle, from your Democrats to your Republicans to your Libertarians. I think we have more decline to state than Republicans in the district. And even within the Democratic Party, it is completely diverse. You run the spectrum. It's cool because you're always getting to see different viewpoints when you do legislation or when they weigh in on legislation. And then when you think about the fact that our community looks like the United Nations, right? You have all these cultures just mixing, and you go down the street and there rarely will you find yourself in a community on a neighborhood in my district that is predominantly one race. It is diverse as diverse comes, and it is diversely mixed. We don't have a lot of this population lives here and this population lives here. But it's really cool to see the different cultures blend and how you see it in our restaurants. There's so many fusions when you look at the restaurants across the district, but you see it in the issues that come up, and people are complex. And it's a beautiful thing because it allows me to be a more complex and nuanced legislator, because I know my district is just as complex and nuanced on the decisions that I make up in Sacramento.
Yeah, politics by itself is complex, right? They call it the sausage making process of bills. I want to hit you mentioned the Delta. Let's talk about the environment and the Delta, and a lot of concern about Southern California and some of the water hitting the Delta, balancing the agriculture needs and just protecting the beauty of it.
It's such a cool ecosystem. The Delta is an environmentally sensitive area, and at the same time, it's a water supply and a strategic water supply. And I'm co-chair of the Delta Caucus. I'm what we call the Assembly chair. And my counterpart is Senator McNerney. He's the Senate chair. And we lead this organization, this caucus together. I've been the Assembly chair since I came into the legislature. And I tell you, we recognize living in this community from, I call it the dog catcher on up. We know how important the Delta is. I was a Parks and Rec commissioner having to weigh in on at the time, Delta tunnels. That was important to people. I'm a transplant. I come from the Central Valley, Fresno, actually. Born and raised, a whole adult, can drink alcohol legally before I left. I grew up with water scarcity. I remember growing up singing the song, "When watering your lawn, think odd, even. Like literally, that's the song we knew as a kid. It was interesting to be raised in water scarcity. We're constantly hearing about we need water, or it's the breadbasket of California, ag needs water, like all of that. To moving up north because my husband is Air Force veteran, so he came up to Travis Air Force Base. So where water was an abundant supply. And there was a protectionism around water, like not sharing. I come to this water conversation with that viewpoint of how do we have a strategic water supply for the state and provide clean water for everyone, enough water for all of our farmers to do their work, enough water to strengthen our environmentally sensitive areas like the Delta, and make sure fishes and everybody who depends on water can have it. But at the same time, not sacrifice one for the other. And the conversation around the Delta, for me, since being in the not since, but joining the conversation in the legislature, really has been this zero-sum game. If I share, I won't have. And I want you to share and you won't have. And how do we then balance of how do we strengthen the Delta? Because we need our levees are put together with, I can't remember the saying I said, I forgot it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Our levees need to be strengthened in the Delta so that if we were to have an earthquake, we could protect it, because I tell you, an earthquake would decimate it. But at the same time, when you think about how we get our water now, it's not so much the snowpack. It's more about these atmospheric rivers. How are we as a state focusing in on that? For me, it's about protecting the Delta, but it's also recognizing it has a role to play. But we just can't sacrifice one area for another. We have to be smart about it, and we have to think about water from a very high level, but dig deep down in that comprehensive view of how do we be strategic about how we get our water now, what are the impacts of climate change, how do we protect our environmentally sensitive area, and how do we make sure that every single person in California can have clean water, access to clean water, and that our farmers can do what they do best, which is provide food not only for our state, but for our country and for the entire globe.
What I love about this podcast is that's just a great way to look at things. And that comes out in these podcasts versus typical news soundbite. And that changes, what you're talking about is changing the way everybody thinks. I've had 2 water district people on that have talked about how, like Ernie from Contra Costa Water District talks about how there is enough water in the state of California at any given time. It's just, where is it and can we capture it? And right, what you're talking about now is this onslaught of those atmospheric rivers, and how can we, as a state, better capture that fresh water, which is coming down quickly, where we used to have that trickle of snow melt.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about transportation, because this is your favorite topic. And anytime I've heard you speak, you have been a longtime expert in the legislature and have chaired the transportation committee in the assembly. Let's talk about transportation overall, and then let's focus in on any bills that you've hit in the last year or 2 that you want to talk about.
Sounds good. First, I want to give the context to why do I love transportation, especially when people look at my background on my resume, my professional resume, they'll see a lot of housing, a lot of housing. They were like, how do you go from housing to transportation? And housing is everything. I grew up with housing insecurity. I'm all about housing. It's at the bottom of when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you put it in a pyramid, housing is at the bottom of that. You need it. You need shelter to be able to thrive. But once I get you housed, transportation is everything else. Literally everything else. It is how you get to your recreation centers, your job centers, healthcare, everywhere. I'm a grandma now of 2.5 years. And I like to liken transportation is how you get to grandma's house. And there's many ways to get to grandma's house, whether it's walking, riding a bike, getting on a train, getting in a car, like all the multi-modes to get to grandma's house. That's transportation. I like to talk to people in context of that, because without quality transportation, you can't have a high quality of life. And I'm all about giving people a high quality of life. That is my shtick, is let's focus on quality of life issues and we'll make the world better. And so that's my context for transportation and why it's so important. And I think about, as a young girl growing up on the west side of Fresno, my mom was a single mom. Sometimes we had a car. Even when we had a car, it didn't work, right? Like, it didn't always work. We were using the buses. But when I got here to Travis Air Force Base, and now I had a car, I had a reliable car, I never had to use the bus. And I became a local leader, a brand new council member. And I remember somebody coming to fuss me about the bus system. And I never thought about the bus system because I was now a car owner. And we measured cars. Access to a car is your sign of upward mobility, right? Economic mobility. I started working on the bus issue in Sassoon City. To give the listeners context, Sassoon City is about 4.5 square miles. To traverse it in a car, it's likely 10 minutes. 10 minutes from anywhere gets you outside of Sassoon City. I got on a bus at the request of one of my residents to get to City Hall from my house. and it took an hour. It was a 6-minute drive. It took 1 hour on a bus. It's crazy. I realized like we needed to transform the system. So that really started my journey of like transportation is everything. Now my viewpoint at the state is how do we create a transportation system that lives up to the fact that we are the 4th largest economy or 5th. I used to say depending on what Germany is doing now is depending on what Japan is doing. And we have to live up to that. And it doesn't right now. And I want it to. That's looking at every single mode from how our airplanes work, how our trains work, including high-speed rail, which I'm a fan of, how we use our vehicles, how we use public transit, how do we have access? And then also looking at equity lens too, because we've had this conversation around cars and highways and byways and whether we should be investing in expanding highways. And I know there's a viewpoint out there, especially in our environmental community, reduction of cars, reducing of highways. And at the same time, recognizing with the lens of equity that a lot of our building of highways decimated Black and brown communities. The original redlining is related to where we placed highways. But at the same time, those communities have been disconnected. We have to connect them. That means we do still have to build highways. We do have to expand our highways because we have congestion issues. But not all above board. We have to make decisions on where is that appropriate? Where do we need to increase access to open space? Typically, we worry about getting people to their jobs or medical centers or things like that. But what about just getting access to a park or some type of recreational center? Those are the things that I think about when looking at legislation that comes through my committee, when talking about budget priorities, because I also sit on budget sub 4, which deals with transportation, climate, and energy. So that's the lens from which I look at transportation. How do I make it better? How do I make it live up to the fact that we're the 4th largest economy? And how do I make it rise up to meet our community members where they are so that they can then access the type of life that they want?
I often cite this, but Tim Hale from CCTA has been educating me about active transportation management. And he's working to bring that to 680, which he said is the equivalent of adding a lane, which is 20% traffic impact by them actively managing it and having cars communicate and the system communicate and managing all of that technology and transforming the way we do things is going to be important long term.
For sure. And it's the future, right? Doing that type of hands-on management and looking at the different ways we'll move. I had the opportunity to run a bill about advanced air mobility, which is a 2-year bill, and we expect to finish it up early in the new year. And that's those autonomous small little airplanes that seat 4 to 6 and that do that first last mile from an airport or get you somewhere from one community to the next. I recently got to go to San Francisco and ride in Zook, their autonomous robo-taxi. It was a pretty cool experience to be able to do that. I enjoyed it actually thoroughly. And I've been in a Waymo and had a positive experience in that. And so I think how we move in the future is definitely going to take on this Jetson-like appeal. But at the end of the day, we still need infrastructure to be able to move ourselves. Like it doesn't happen without infrastructure. And so one of the bills that I have this year, another 2-year bill, is how do we have sustainable funding for that type of infrastructure to ensure we're rising up to meet the ways we are going to move in the future. So I'm excited about that work. Nobody likes to pay more for anything, but at the same time, I think people find value if they're going to have a cost and they want value. And I think we'll find an opportunity to show value in what it means to have sustainable transportation funding.
Let's talk about that air mobility you referenced in your bill there for a little bit of a deep dive. I think when I talk about it to most people, they don't believe that it's real or it's for the uber rich. They are talking about, though, for the Olympic Committee in LA in 2028, that they will move 10 to 20%, including all the athletes and VIPs, via this autonomous air taxi electric vehicle service. What will it take for somebody to go from Fairfield to Oakland and work on this or somewhere else in your district?
A few things. First, my bill. My bill is really to set the statewide framework for advanced air mobility in our state. And it's important because if you imagine, if you want to get to Fairfield or Oakland, those are two different jurisdictions and you cross multiple jurisdictions. You have to have this seamless framework to be able to build that type of infrastructure or system on. That can't be Fairfield's going to do it this way and Oakland's going to do it this way. And those two are different, then you'll never get to go to those two places. So my bill actually sets up the framework. It builds on a report that's supposed to come out. We expect it to come out any minute. The last bit of that will get dropped into this bill and we'll get it across the finish line to the governor's desk. That's extremely important. One of the tours I got to do over this break is with Skyway's technology. And what they're building is, if you can imagine, a virtual highway and byway system in the air to manage 2,000 to 30,000 feet. As FAA covers anything off the ground, anything in the air, that's the domain of FAA. But they really only focus on airplanes. Who's focusing on that 30,000 below feet up and below? And that's Skyways as a technology to build these virtual highways or tubes so that autonomous vehicle can, when it gets into the sky, uses that tube to navigate without interference, because it's about being safe. And if you imagine doing for the Olympics, you got to have a highway in the sky, so to speak. And you also have to manage the fact that drones are out there and be able to see those drones. And what's great about this, it's going to make it pretty safe. They're doing a pilot program or working on a pilot program with San Francisco. Because if you can imagine, public safety, like our police and fire, have to be aware of what's in the air at that level. Imagine Domino's Pizza delivering a drone to a house, but the house next door is on fire. You might want to stop that drone, right? This technology will not only really govern the skies as it relates to autonomous vehicles, but also as it relates to our drone technology aware. And it really gets like the Jetsons, or if you can imagine, remember watching the movie Total Recall, how it seemed to be highways in the skies. That's what you'll see. And that's the type of infrastructure that has to be in place if we want to meet this goal of moving people quickly in 2028 for the Olympics. They're trying to have everybody on public transportation, from buses to autonomous vehicles to autonomous vehicles in the sky. And the only way we'll do that is if we really work hard over these next 2 years to get the legislation that needs to be done and make the investments as far as monetarily that needs to be done as well.
And that's so fascinating. Just how everything is changing
so rapidly.
How does that impact your constituents and their commute? And if you're in the greater East Bay, Solano, Contra Costa, how does any of these changes and investments, how is this impacting us every day?
Yeah, I go back to quality of life. I talk about that a lot because it's just my thing. It's my focus. It's why I got into public service in the first place. And when you look at Solano and Contra Costa, just the East Bay in general, or North Bay, we're commuterville, right? We commute to the core Bay area for those tech jobs, finance, accounting. We commute to Sacramento if we want the government jobs, right? And it's really about how do we make life easier so that you get some of that time back off the road, off of that commute. I think that these type of technologies are going to be revolutionary to be able to do that. I'm forgetting the name. It's going to be in Contra Costa. It's like a mini rail system where you're in like a little autonomous
glideways.
Yes. It's like even that, being able to help people on their commute. I take the Capitol Corridor to Sacramento. I love the amount of freedom I get to not having to drive and how much time I get to not having to drive, to focus on something else, to do emails or just read a book or have some downtime. So any way that we can get people in public transit or get people carpooling together or reducing their commute, is going to feed into that quality of life. It's going to be a direct benefit to my constituents. It's part of why I did the bill on SR 37 for the interim project. People were adding an extra hour and a half to their day for a commute. If you think about that in terms of dollars and cents, if I have a minimum wage job I'm driving to, when I add an extra hour and a half, that is a direct impact on my finances. By doing this interim project that allows even public transit, I'm going to reduce their commute time, which means more time at home, more time doing other things productive, more money in their pocket, and all of that feeding in the quality of life. It all goes back to quality of life at some point.
Let's dive on mass transit sector a little bit. I just hosted a meeting for 3 different bus organizations for East Bay leadership, and they were talking about the state's climate goals, that they all have to go to zero emission buses. But the cost of that to the availability of the buses and the timeline for the requirements don't match. Hey, if we put 40 more people on one bus per day or even per week, we'll actually save more greenhouse gas emissions than a zero emission bus will. How do we find the benefit of increasing public transit, but reaching some of those climate goals or giving them credit for getting people off the road in individual cars?
I think we have to look at our policies. One of the things that I've been concerned about is we have these aspirational goals, which are wonderful. They're great in the sense that we need clean air, clean water, healthy environment for everyone. But we leave whole communities behind. We put a burden on our governments, our local governments, in terms of cost that we don't share with them. To your point, that if they just got 40 more people on a bus, that would do greater than just in the current bus that they have now, which is a lower emission vehicle, than it would be to go to a zero emission vehicle. And with our withdrawal of our waivers, that withdrew it for everyone in private, but did not withdraw it for anyone in government. And government is the people. That burden is not like some far off entity that has no impact on your average resident. It's a direct payment to an extra resident, right? Because they're either going to get less service or they're going to have to pay more to be able to get that service. And when I say, even if you don't ride the service, meaning me as a person who doesn't get on a bus, my tax will have to go to pay for that when it's not getting the exact benefit that we need. I think part of that is relooking at the rules around that. That has been hard to do in Sacramento, I will tell you. It is like touching a third rail. But I think that given where we are with the Trump administration, I believe that people are more amenable to those type of discussions to provide relief for them. But we also have to do a better job of telling the story that our buses are safe. That's part of why I did the bill related to public transit safety, ensuring that our workers who are on public transit are taken care of, just like a worker in an office. When it comes to assaults and violence, that we can get temporary restraining orders for folks who are not behaving as they should on a bus. Not only protects our workers, but it also protects the bus riders and helps people know that it's safe, because some people don't do public transit who would like to because they don't know that it's safe. But also giving them the opportunity to, instead of investing that money in a zero emission bus, making a more consistent schedule, because a lot of people don't ride public transit because they need that consistency and reliability. I know I struggle with the Capitol Corridor sometimes because maritime law overrides rail, and the train that gets to me sometimes gets held up on the bridge that has to open up to let ships through. It can set me off and behind. And that's a different issue. But some people don't do it for that reason because they need to get to work on time. The time is money. Where I have a bit of flexibility job, I can shift my schedule a little bit. But if I was showing up to work, I can't consistently come late. Making sure that our transit operators can invest in that type of consistent, reliable schedule. And then it being expanded to more times where people are going. If I'm going to rely on public transit, then I need to be able to get there at 8 o'clock at night. Not that many buses. BART does, but not that many buses have late night service. And so being able to expand the number of hours, I think we need to think about how do we get more people on doing some of those things more than the zero admission. But that is a hard conversation in Sacramento because some of these goals were hard fought from our environmental community who is concerned about this. But at the same time, our environmental community are also concerned about getting more people using public transit. It's about taking the time to have that conversation.
Lots going on. You also had bills this year on transportation, on high-speed rail and child passenger safety. Do you want to touch on those a little bit?
Yeah. We started with high-speed rail. We are still working on that. There was, my colleague, Senator Cortese, also chair of transportation on the Senate side. We were working on that together because we want to see high-speed rail succeed. And we know that it's had challenges in the past, But this is not about what's happened in the past. It just be better going forward. It's how do we learn from the past to do better in the future? Because we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which a lot of people want to do, because we do need high-speed rail. We are, once again, the fourth largest economy in the world. We should have high-speed rail. And so we want to invest in that. But I did have a bill about child passenger safety laws, which was actually my most controversial bill. It ended up being, do not touch a parent with a kid currently in a child seat, because the kids want to get out. And it turned out to be way more controversial than I thought it would be. But we did get something across the finish line, which was passing the 5-step test. If a parent right now goes to their pediatrician, goes to CHP, looks at their manual on how to properly have a child seated in a car, it's going to talk about the 5-step safety test, which is having a seatbelt, sitting in a seatbelt that goes across your body, not against your neck, that sits on your thighs, not your stomach, that you're seated down with your back all the way against the back of the seat, that your knees or legs fold down perpendicular out front, and that you can do that the whole time. That's what parents should be looking at. So we codified that in order to have your child safely secured in a vehicle, that is the way to do it. Really, this is about safety, to make sure that every single child, if they were in a car, that they were sitting in a seat that was tailored for them. So if they were to get in an accident, God forbid, they would have the best possible outcome.
Oh, and that's great. And I have 3 daughters, ages 6 to 11. And actually the transition from when you go from a booster with a back to a low booster to nothing, some of the California law has been very stringent. Wait, you almost have to be 15 for some people to meet this, which you sounds like you're clarifying that intent with that law and just finding here are the key safety metrics that we're looking for.
And so each parent can determine what's best for their child based on that step test. Okay, this is where you need to be. And then talking about it from the beginning. Because at the end of the day, it's about being safe. Once we decided to do the bill, I had gotten some pictures of kids who, imagine sitting in a seat with your legs straight out, who had gotten an accident, how terrible that was for their legs. And it's just, you might think about your child whining about being in a seatbelt or being in a car seat still and all that. But I'd rather a child be whining about that than learning how to walk again.
That's a good visual image. And I think something everybody just needs to keep in mind, right? That a lot of these laws are intended to keep everybody safe.
Yeah.
Let's move away from transportation and talk about the political environment in Sacramento, in Solano County. I know you talked about the diversity. We just passed 50 in the state of California. I think we're days away from it being certified. But what's the climate like? This Newsom versus Trump tweet, how does that impact you? How does that impact your constituents?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always been a pragmatic leader. It comes from being a Central Valley girl, right? Always pragmatic and always focused on quality of life. Like from the moment I stepped into Parks and Rec Commissioner, it was all about how do I improve people's quality of life. It was interesting in the 24 election when Trump came in. Trump won the election, and I was disappointed because I was a Harris supporter. And people were talking about, now we got to focus on pocketbook issues, where I'm like, I'm always focused on pocketbook issues. It was nice to see more people talk about the things I was talking about. That felt good, right? Because now I can be more nuanced on things, and people were having purity tests, and now people were more like, okay, we got to be more nuanced. Like, yeah, you're speaking my language, speaking my love language. We've been, in the new year, the speaker made it very clear in the session, we were to be focused on affordability. And so everybody got on the affordability bandwagon of how do we express things in the context of affordability. But at the same time, we were having these fights with the Trump administration that was making things way less affordable. But at the same time, we're trying to do policy and trying to talk through how do we support all these organizations. We have the Trump administration doing the opposite. And so I think where we were as a Democratic caucus, maybe depressed, but ready to focus on affordability and do that work. What has happened over this year is we're like no longer depressed. We're like fighting and doing affordability. We're like, I know how to have, the wallet in one hand, focus on pocketbook issues, and my boxing glove in the other hand, ready to kick your tail on every single issues and do both. And that's been exciting to have that kind of energy. this year so far, like halfway. Like it was like the beginning of the year, we were like pocketbook with sad faces. And now we're like pocketbook, and boxing glove. And it's like, I'm all for it. And let's go. It's been cool. It's been cool. It's scary sometimes because people come to you with like real issues and impacted by the policies of this Trump administration. And a lot of times, because it's federal stuff, as a state leader, you can't do a lot about it. You can't do much about it except listen and see what you can do and then pull that lever and then connect them with federal partners who might have a little bit more, but not much because they're not the party in power. But I will tell you is what I see in the faces of many Californians and so many people in my district is resilience. And that's what we are, resilient people. And we will get through this. We will be better before. I don't think the world's going to end. But I think that we realize how vulnerable our democracy is, how everything that we thought was set in stone and on a solid foundation is not. It's only as solid as we make it. I have loved seeing more people engaged in the civic aspect of life than I ever had in my entire life. I've always been a political nerd, and a lot of times by myself, but it's wonderful to go and see people talking about real issues that are going on in the world that it would have never been talking about those things pre-2024.
Great feedback. When your time is done in the legislature, I'm not rushing you.
Please don't.
When you look back and you talk about pocketbook issues, you talk about the Delta, the transportation, where can you look and say, my time here was successful? What will help you feel that way? I've done this and it helped.
Yeah. I think for me, if I can see tangible results in housing access, affordable housing access approved. And when I say affordable, I don't mean like low income like that's what people think of. I mean that just whatever your income level is, you can afford your housing. That's what I mean when I say affordable. And that transportation access is approved, that our system has gotten better. We can see tangible results where we have more people in public transit, that we have greater access to open space, where we have our whole system, infrastructure to how people move improved. And I think that with those two areas, if I can see great improvement in that, I think I'll feel like job well done. I will tell you, as a local leader, one of the most touching things that I love seeing in my community that tells me I was a good local leader is something actually really small. I grew up dysfunction, crazy household as a kid, and one of my refuges was art. Now, I'm not an artist. I don't do art, but I like to look at it. And statues, I would look at those for days, and murals, and just escape. When I became a local leader, I wanted to change our Parks and Rec that I started serving on to RPMA, which is like Recreation, Parks, Marina, and the Arts. And I changed the commission and added art and wanted to see art everywhere. We made a rule that said if you were building something in Sassoon City, you either had to donate to the art fund or you had to create your own art. And every time I drive in my community and see all the new buildings with murals that represent Sassoon City, if you come through Sassoon City, you will see art either done or in production in just the last few years. Because I was a leader here, I just feel special. I feel like, even though I know there's a lot of things I can hang my hat on, that visual representation was like Lori Wilson was here. And I hope that, yes, housing is improved, transportation is improved, but I hope that if I traverse up and down California, there will be something I see that says, yes, Lori Wilson was a leader here.
Gee, and I thought you would have talked about a new highway being built. I know that bridge between Oakley and Rio Vista.
Yes, I want that done. I want there'll be something. And it could be a bridge or transportation, or it could be a new how we do housing. It could be something. I don't know what it is. Because I didn't think that was going to be the thing that just literally, like on my saddest days of being a leader, when either I got talked to by someone who was just going through and I just felt helpless, or I got talked to with somebody who was livid. It called me out my name, everything but a child of God. I tell you how much going through the community and seeing those things like, okay, yeah, you can do this. This is good work. I think there'll be something like that when I finish being a state leader.
Anything that I haven't asked that you want to talk about? Any key bills that you've done in the last year or two, or things that you're putting together for next year that you want us to know about?
I think if I can end on anything, it would just be how amazing my staff is. I don't think people realize, because they see you as the face, how much work goes on behind the scenes. How you say one thing in a meeting to somebody and how all these worker bees behind you then go to make that come to reality, right? I want to end with giving a shout out to my team. I have an amazing chief who's been with me since day one, who helped me assemble this team and lead the team. He makes sure that the vision I have for the district and for the state gets executed. Have an amazing scheduler who minds my time. She is such a joy to be around, and people adore her when they call and they feel respected and valued. And then she respects and values and makes sure I have time off. And from my ledge director to my ledge team to my capital team, to my district team, I just think that they all do an amazing job of making me look good and doing all the behind the scenes work, so that all I have to do is say, we are going to do XYZ, and then they go make sure XYZ gets done. And I'm one of the districts that we each represent about 500,000 people. Mine is a little higher in the 517,000. And I couldn't do it without them they say they make the world go round, and they do. I want to make sure I shout out my amazing team that are just effective at representing me well in the district and ensuring all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and that people get what they need.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations to all of them. You have a boss that clearly cares about you and is doing good things for the community. Assemblymember Lori Wilson from Solano, all of Solano and parts of Contra Costa and parts of a little bit of Sacramento. You got to be known there. We appreciate you joining here today.
Thank you so much, Jared.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.